depressed right now. You're going to get 2 pieces of candy. Who can help him out with the third?
Somebody in my group. Yeah, come on. Right.
Yeah.
Kylie, do you know?
These were
Right,
actually in the very first word we talked about today.
All right, so biopsychosocial, looking at your social cultural perspective, your biological perspective, and your psychological perspective. Those are the primary influences on your learning. So you're close, you got 2 of them. So the genetic predispositions, those include the innate readiness to form associations. So looking at Breland, who wanted to teach a chicken how to play baseball. So we taught a chicken to pull a loop that would swing the bat. Well, then after you hit the ball, what do you normally do after you hit the ball in baseball? You run, right? Okay, so after the chicken sees the ball go and he's supposed to run, well, his genetic predisposition told him, oh, that's something I should go eat. I'm gonna go and follow it like it's a food. So that gives you a biological constraint on your influences on your learning. So what is an unconditioned response? You guys cannot answer this. Leslie?
An unconditioned response is like responding to something like naturally, like something you don't think about, and yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. So your adaptive responses. Who has an idea of what that might be? No. Middle.
Jim.
Represent.
Jim. That's Jared.
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 Jared? Nope. All right. Yes.
Wait, what was the question?
What do you think an adaptive response is?
Like a response that you adapt to doing because of your environment.
Yep, that's a perfect example of it, yeah. So when we have an experience, say, I put my hand, not thinking I put it on the stove, what am I gonna do? Yeah, you're gonna pull it away. And so the next time I'm around that stove, I'm not gonna think, I'm gonna automatically know, okay, I'm not gonna put my hand next to that stove because what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna burn it. So what happens in your brain is you're gonna have new synaptic connections form in the cortex that you don't have to think about it as hard the next time. It becomes an innate response for you. So another example of that is taste aversion. This was a really fun one in your textbook. So can anyone tell me what the example was in the textbook? All right, more quizzes on the textbook coming up. So there was an example of how farmers kept the wolves from eating their sheep. And so the lamb was laced with something so that when the coyotes or the wolves came in to eat them, they would get this horrible taste and they would become sick. So after a while, they learned to not come near their sheep anymore because they knew that what would happen to them, something bad would happen. To the point of where they would put those wolves or coyotes in a pen with the sheep, they would almost become fearful of them because they knew they had that connection, that synaptic connection in their head that said, something about this is wrong, I know that I'm gonna have a bad experience with this. And a real life example that well, not everybody, I hope everybody hasn't experienced this, but if you have, I feel your pain, food poisoning. So for me, I can't eat corn dogs because when I think of them, oh, they just make me sick because when I was little, I got food poisoning from a corn dog. And your textbook gives an example of oysters. That's a common one for a lot of people they get sick from. So when you think about that, you think, okay, I'm not gonna do this anymore because this had a horrible reaction for me. That has a horrible stimulus and response. So you have psychological influences. Can anybody give an example of what a previous experience would be to keep you from, that would have an impact on you psychologically, to keep you from doing that same, or reacting to that same stimulus? Anybody? So your previous experiences, say you did come in a dress, you would know next time that, okay, well, if I showed up in a dress, then everybody's gonna laugh at me, so that becomes your predictability of associations. You learn through your experiences that, okay, maybe it might not be the same thing, but you learn that something's close to it, that you're gonna deal with, someone's gonna make fun of you, or maybe it's the same thing with eating something. You know, if it's a similar food, you might have the same kind of association that you might get sick or something like that. Or if you hear loud noises, then you might get fearful of that situation. And then you also have generalizations that come from that. That, well, all seafood makes me sick, or all fair food makes me sick, or something like that. But you also learn to discriminate between the generalizations as well. So I'm gonna pass it up to me.
Any more questions between you?
Questions between you?
This doesn't matter anymore because Paulo broke it.
Shut up. Oh, no, you need that. That's the mic.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about cognitive learning. Some behaviorists believe that all learning can be attributed to a stimulus response, like in the conditioning that we've been learning about. Others believe that there's a lot more at work. So this is sometimes referred to as cognitive learning theory or cognitive social learning. According to this theory, people have attitudes, beliefs, expectations, motivations, emotions that also affect the learning process. So this is where the cognitive processes come into play. Both humans and non-human animals are social creatures, and we do a lot of learning by observation and imitation. Does anybody know who Edward C. Tolman is? He did an experiment. The first group of rats he had were allowed to just wander aimlessly through a maze, just wander as they would and go where they wanted to. No reward, no punishment, no nothing, just wander. The second group was given reinforcement for getting to the end of the maze. The third group was not given any reinforcement for the first 10 days. On day 11, they started with, receiving reinforcement at the end of the maze also. So which group do you think learned the fastest? Yes?
The one given reinforcement right away.
The second group?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. But group 3, the ones that didn't get the reinforcement for the first 10 days, at day 11, when that reinforcement started, they quickly caught up with the second group. It was all of a sudden there was a reason. Well, what he discovered is that while these rats are wandering through the maze, they're building what we call a cognitive map. I haven't even got to that yet. They're building a cognitive map. Does anybody know what a cognitive map is? So when you go home, do you have to relearn where to go? Do you have to relearn where you put everything in your house, where your bed's at? No? You know why? Because you have a cognitive map of that. You have a mental representation of what that means. That's your space, and you've been there enough that you've built that in your mind, and you can function in that space without even thinking about it. That's a cognitive map. So what Tolman found was that these rats were building that cognitive map even when they were just aimlessly wandering. But without reinforcement, there was no reason to display it. So they could learn and build the cognitive map, but nobody knew until there was a reason for them to show them. Does that make sense? So what we call that, when they were building that cognitive map and nobody knew it was there, that's what we call latent learning. And that's displayed when there's a reinforcement or a punishment of some kind where you can actually see that they did learn something. They weren't just wandering around aimlessly doing nothing. keeps looking for it though. So here's the definitions for those terms I was using. The cognitive map, a mental representation. That one's pretty easy to remember. Latent learning, you really got to think about that because it's hard to put a definition on something that you don't see initially. It's really difficult to kind of define that. Intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. These are very important to your cognitive processes because what motivates you affects your learning. So I have some more questions here. Should parents reward their children for something such as good grades? Keeping intrinsic and extrinsic motivation in mind, do we think that that's a good idea? Anybody? I see some nodding. Why?
What's the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation? Right.
Good, perfect. So why do we think that it's good to
I think it's good because as a kid,
Right.
you're not looking at it as your future. So as a parent rewarding the child, they'll do better, they'll get better grades. They're not gonna do it on their own without knowing that there's going to be a reward.
So you can kind of see how that would be affected by like a developmental stage where what they value.
Right.
So I could see that, yeah. Anybody else have anything else to add? No? No? Well, how about this? You ever notice that for all the money and glory they receive, professional athletes do not look like they are enjoying themselves? So extrinsic and intrinsic, who has a reason for that? Why do you think that's a problem? Why wouldn't they be enjoying
That would
it?
be just like a job. You could go to your job saying, I hate this job, or you could love your job and it's a reward for yourself.
That's true.
So if you're loving the sport that you're doing, you're gonna be happy. It's not gonna be about the money that you get.
After a while, it's kind of habituated.
You have to enjoy it.
It's just work. Okay, I can see that. So I'm going to move on to some observational learning. Wait, what is a cognitive map? She should get two. She talked
I
twice.
did.
What is a cognitive map?
Here,
The mental representation.
Good, good. What is latent learning? Yes?
Learning happens but isn't displayed until later.
Good, good. Okay, this should be easy. What's the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation? Yes?
Intrinsic is when you're doing it for yourself, and extrinsic means that you get something out of it. Excitement. When you get a reward.
Yeah, good. So observational learning is obviously learning by observing others. Has anybody ever run into the term modeling before? You can think of where that would be important. I mean, you hear it. You hear about models. You hear about. You think about the implications there about. Are we modeling ourselves after them? Is that why they call them that? There's a lot of modeling that happens in your daily lives, especially here in college. I did want to talk about Bandura. Does anybody know who Bandura is? Okay, well, Bandura, he ran some experiments. We're going to show you some. But he decided that there were at least 4 separate processes that were necessary for somebody to learn by observation. And those are attention, retention, reproduction, reinforcement. Those 4 things have to happen. I didn't go over pro-social. We need to hurry.
Mike, is your chest pain feeling better?
Watson had shown that emotions are learnt, and Harlow that we are intensely social creatures. So it was natural to put these two ideas together and ask how much of what we do and feel is learned from other people. In 1961, American psychologist Albert Bandura set out to see how far just watching other people influences our behavior. Bandura chose to study aggression. At the time, the widespread view was that watching violence reduces aggression, it purges us. But was this true? To find out, Bandura experimented on small children, aged 3 to 5. So what Bandura did is he put an adult in a room with a child and a bunch of toys, including something he called the Bobo doll, which is a giant inflatable doll. Then what happened after about a minute, the adult unexpectedly started beating up the doll in really quite a vicious manner, shouting, screaming, kicking, hitting with a hammer, and went on like this for about 10 minutes. What would the child do if after watching the adult they were left in a room on their own with the same toys? Oh, she really is going for it. She's doing exactly the same as she saw the adult do. She's lifted the doll up and now she's really hammering it. She's got a little hammer out, she's having good toes now. Shows innovation going on. Every child who watched the adult being violent copied much of what they'd seen. The closest imitation was when a child observed an adult of the same sex. Now he's got a gun out and he's using that, a combination of the gun and the hammer, to just whack the doll. He's got a very aggressive expression on his face. Importantly, another group who had watched an adult play gently played calmly, showing no signs of aggression. Basically, what the children saw, the children did. This was an utterly unexpected finding. Before Bandura did this experiment, psychologists thought that seeing somebody else acting out a violent scene would be cathartic, it would sort of purge you. But what this clearly demonstrated and really shocked people at the time is that actually what happens when you see something doing violent actions, you tend to imitate them. Bandura's findings were given added impact by his timing. His experiment took place just as television was moving into the home. 2 years later, Bandura reran his experiment with one important difference. This time, he wanted to compare how children react to watching an aggressive adult, not in real life, but on film. Children watched two versions. One was a straightforward recording of the adult beating up the Bobo doll. The second, a fantasy version, with the attacking adult dressed as a cat. In almost every case, Bandura got the same results. Children imitated what they'd seen. The results were dynamite. This was one of the first experiments to look at the impact of television violence. The complicated relationship between TV and behavior is still being debated. But it was Bandura who opened the floodgates and launched an entirely new area of research.
Okay, so you guys get the idea of that and the implications of Bandura's research, and we hear that all the time in the news today with kids watching violent video games and then acting aggressively towards others. And rather than that, that brings in the psychological and biological components. So they have predispositions to this anger, which is something that Bandura doesn't really talk about. So we have one more practical application of the modeling, but we don't have time for that. So I guess if you guys want to turn in your cards, and then we'll see you guys on Thursday.